Antiseptic burns the back of your throat if you breathe it in too long. Linoleum squeaks under cheap rubber soles. Nobody looks twice at a middle-aged woman emptying a bedpan. They see the scrubs, not the scars. They see a tired nurse, never the ghost hiding in plain sight. St. Jude's Memorial Hospital was the kind of place where careers went to die. Nestled in a forgotten pocket of the Oregon coast, it was a cinder-block monolith that smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage, heavy-duty bleach, and the metallic tang of old age. It was exactly what Sarah Jenkins had been looking for. At 3:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, the emergency department was a purgatory of fluorescent hums and ticking clocks. Sarah stood at the nurse's station, methodically peeling a dried crust of pink soap from the lip of the dispenser. Her shoulders were hunched, a posture she had cultivated over 3 years to shave 2 inches off her actual height. She wore scrubs a size too large, colored a washed-out seafoam green that practically camouflaged her against the peeling wallpaper. Her hair, dyed a flat, unremarkable brown, was scraped back into a messy bun, held together by a plastic claw clip. She looked tired. She looked ordinary. She looked completely harmless. "Jenkins," a voice barked. Dr. Arthur Higgins pushed through the double-swinging doors, rubbing his temples. Higgins was a man held together by nicotine patches and a deep, simmering resentment for his alimony payments. He dropped a clipboard onto the laminate counter with a sharp clatter. "Bed 4 needs a new IV. Blew the vein." "Again. Guy's got pipes like wet tissue paper," Higgins muttered, reaching for a stale donut from a pink cardboard box near the computer terminals. "Right away, doctor," Sarah said. Her voice was pitched a half-octave higher than its natural resonance, adding a soft, slightly hesitant tremor. It was the voice of a woman who apologized when someone else bumped into her at the grocery store. She gathered her supplies: alcohol wipes, tourniquet, Tegaderm, a 2-0 gauge catheter. As she walked toward bed 4, her gait was an uneven shuffle. But if anyone had been truly watching, if anyone in this decaying hospital actually possessed an ounce of situational awareness, they would have noticed that her footsteps made absolutely no sound. They would have noticed that her eyes, behind the cheap, smudge-covered blue light glasses, scanned the room with a predatory, calculating geometry, clocking the exit routes, the blind spots, and the makeshift weapons in the room. Bed 4 was a local logger who had decided to operate a chainsaw after a half-rack of cheap beer. His leg was heavily bandaged, and he was thrashing, high on pain and low on oxygen. Sarah approached the bed. The scent of stale malt liquor and unwashed denim hit her nostrils. It was gross, visceral, and beautifully normal. She tied the tourniquet around his thick, bruised arm. "Hey, watch it, sweetheart," the logger slurred, trying to yank his arm away. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't offer a soothing Florence Nightingale coo, either. She just pressed her thumb against a very specific nerve bundle near his elbow. It wasn't enough to cause agonizing pain, just a sudden, paralyzing numbness that made his arm go limp. "Hold still," she murmured, her voice dropping its artificial high pitch for a fraction of a second. The man blinked, suddenly docile, staring at her with vague confusion. She found the vein by touch, bypassing the blown, bruised tissue Higgins had mangled. Her fingers read the topography of his arm like a blind woman reading Braille. The needle slid in at a perfect 30-degree angle. A flash of dark crimson in the chamber. She taped it down with mechanical, flawless efficiency, her hands moving in a blur that completely contradicted her sluggish demeanor. 3 seconds. Done. She stepped back, letting her shoulders slump again. "All set, Mr. Brooks. Try not to bend your wrist." She walked away before he could mumble a response. Heading toward the break room, a sudden wave of exhaustion hit her. It wasn't the physical toll of the shift. It was the psychological weight of the charade. Pretending to be incompetent was exhausting. Feigning hesitation took more energy than actual combat. In the cramped break room, she poured a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt battery acid. She pressed the warm styrofoam against her forehead, closing her eyes. For a moment, the sensory input of the hospital faded. Her hands, resting on the cheap formica table, began to shake. She stared at them. It wasn't fear. It was the opposite. It was a phantom withdrawal, a deep, cellular craving for adrenaline that she forced down into the darkest pit of her stomach every single day. She hated the shaking. It made her feel weak, out of control. She snapped a wooden stir stick in half between her fingers, the sharp crack echoing in the empty room. "Stay small," she told herself. "Stay invisible." It had worked for 3 years, 4 months, and 12 days. The world thought Nadia Torres was dead, burned to ash in a drone strike outside of Kandahar. Sarah Jenkins was born from those ashes, a woman with no history, bad credit, and a penchant for knitting. She tossed the broken stir stick into the trash. It was almost dawn. Just 2 more hours until the end of her shift. 2 more hours of emptying catheters, ignoring Higgins' condescension, and blending into the peeling paint. By 5:45 a.m., the Oregon sky was a bruised, slate gray. The graveyard shift was in its final, agonizing death throes. The hospital staff moved like zombies, their conversations reduced to monosyllabic grunts. Sarah was at the nurse's station, restocking a cart with fresh linens. The rough cotton of the cheap hospital towels scraped against her dry cuticles. The rhythmic shh of an ancient floor buffer echoed down the north corridor. It was peaceful in its absolute mediocrity. Then, the floor buffer wasn't the only thing vibrating. It started deep in the jawbone, a low, subsonic thrum that made the lukewarm coffee in Sarah's mug ripple with concentric circles. The humming of the fluorescent lights seemed to stutter. Dr. Higgins looked up from his charts, frowning. Is the boiler acting up again? Maintenance was supposed to fix that. It wasn't the boiler. Sarah knew exactly what it was. Her stomach didn't drop. It completely ceased to exist, replaced by a freezing, suffocating block of ice. The smell of the bleached towels vanished, suddenly eclipsed in her sensory memory by the scent of ozone, burning sand, and aviation fuel. The sound grew from a vibration into a heavy, rhythmic beating that rattled the drop ceiling tiles, raining fine white powder onto the linoleum. Thwack, thwack, thwack. "What the hell is that?" a younger nurse, Chloe, asked, walking toward the large glass windows of the ambulance bay. "Medevac?" Higgins guessed, standing up. "Dispatch didn't radio about an incoming trauma." "That's no medevac," Sarah whispered to herself. The words slipped out before she could catch them. Medevacs were agile, high-pitched things. A-Stars or Bell 407S. This sound was massive. It was a pair of General Electric turboshaft engines. It was a UH-60 Black Hawk. She didn't walk to the window. She backed away from the desk, her spine hitting the cold plaster of the wall behind her. Her breath hitched. A sudden violent wave of nausea rolled over her, so strong she had to swallow hard against the rising bile. Run. The instinct screamed through her nervous system, electrifying deadened pathways. Out the loading dock, through the morgue, into the woods, but her legs felt like they were encased in wet cement. For all her training, for all her lethal proficiency, the sheer staggering reality of being found paralyzed her. Outside, a storm of dead leaves, gravel, and trash whipped against the glass doors. The hospital's security lights flared on, illuminating the monstrous matte black silhouette descending directly onto the employee parking lot. It crushed a stray shopping cart beneath its landing gear with a screech of twisting metal. There were no medical crosses painted on its side, no identifying tail numbers, just a void of black, absorbing the dawn light. "They're landing right on my Corolla," Higgins yelled, his apathy replaced by outrage. He marched toward the automatic sliding doors. "Don't go out there," Sarah said. Her voice was raspy, stripped of its artificial meekness. Higgins ignored her. waving his arms as the doors slid open, letting in a howl of deafening wind and the sharp, choking stench of combusted kerosene. Before Higgins could step outside, the side doors of the helicopter slid back. 3 men stepped out. They didn't scramble or duck beneath the rotors. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized fluidity. They wore tactical gear unmarked, devoid of patches or flags. Heavy plate carriers, drop-leg holsters, and short-barreled rifles slung tight to their chests. The hospital staff froze. Chloe let out a sharp, panicked squeak and ducked behind the triage desk. Higgins stopped dead in his tracks, his hands slowly rising in the air, his medical degree entirely useless against the matte black muzzle of an assault rifle. The men entered the emergency room, bringing the freezing morning air with them. Their boots crunched heavily on the linoleum, leaving smears of mud and pulverized gravel. The man in the center stepped forward. He didn't wear a helmet. His hair was close-cropped, graying at the temples. His eyes were the color of wet concrete. Commander Dante Brooks. He didn't look at Higgins. He didn't look at the screaming monitors in the trauma bays. He scanned the room with a machine-like precision, discarding irrelevant data. Sarah was still pressed against the wall. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, mourning the death of Sarah Jenkins. She opened them, her posture shifting, the hunched shoulders straightened. The terrified, wide-eyed stare hardened into something cold, sharp, and infinitely dangerous. Brooks's gaze locked onto her. He stopped walking. The other 2 operatives immediately flanked him, forming a wedge, their eyes scanning the perimeter, but their weapons pointed toward the floor. Silence descended on the ER, broken only by the slowing whine of the helicopter rotors outside. "Dr. Higgins," Brooks said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that effortlessly cut through the tension. "Tell your staff to remain calm. We aren't here for your drugs, and we aren't here for your patients." Higgins stammered, his eyes darting between the armed men and his nurses. Who are you?" Brooks ignored him, his eyes never leaving the woman in the oversized seafoam scrubs. He took 2 slow steps toward the nurse's station. "You dyed your hair," Brooks said. The observation was entirely devoid of warmth. Sarah slowly lowered the stack of clean towels onto the counter. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. The phantom withdrawal was gone, replaced by the cold metallic rush of a combat high. She hated him for bringing it back. "It washes out," Sarah said. Her voice was flat, dead, devoid of any inflection. Higgins looked back at her, completely bewildered. "Jenkins? What is he talking about? Who are these guys?" Brooks pulled a pair of heavy leather gloves from his belt, slapping them rhythmically against his thigh. "There's a situation in Geneva, the kind of situation that requires a specific, delicate touch, a ghost's touch." "I'm dead, Dante," she said, the words tasting like ash. "You read the after-action report yourself. You signed my death certificate." "I signed a piece of paper to give you peace," Brooks countered, stepping closer, the smell of jet fuel practically radiating off him. "But peace is a luxury we can no longer afford. They have the payload, Nadia." The name dropped into the sterile hospital room like a live grenade. "Nadia," Chloe whimpered from beneath the desk. Higgins stared, his jaw slack, finally realizing that the timid, clumsy nurse who fetched his coffee had never actually existed. Nadia looked at the cracked linoleum beneath her cheap rubber shoes. She felt a profound, suffocating sorrow. She had almost learned how to be human. She had almost learned how to sleep without dreaming of blood. She looked back up at Brooks. She didn't square her jaw. She didn't offer a defiant, heroic quip. She just looked incredibly, profoundly tired. "Go to hell, Dante," she whispered. "I'm already there," he replied softly. "I brought the transport. Get your gear." Silence stretched so thin it threatened to snap and decapitate everyone in the room. Nadia didn't blink. She kept her eyes locked on Dante's, searching for a fracture in his concrete gaze. There was none. He wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to collect government property. "I don't have gear," Nadia said, her voice dropping another octave, settling into its natural raspy cadence. Sarah Jenkins knits sweaters. She doesn't keep a go bag. Then you'll use ours, a voice snapped from Brooks's right. The operative who spoke was younger, mid-20s maybe. His tactical vest sat a little too high, his knuckles white around the grip of his rifle. He had the hungry, impatient energy of a dog straining against a choke collar. His name tape was absent, but Nadia's brain automatically cataloged his threat level. High aggression, low discipline. "Stand down, Chavez," Brooks said, not looking away from Nadia. Travis Chavez ignored the order. He took a heavy, aggressive step forward, his boots leaving a smear of damp earth on the sterile floor. "We are operating on a 60-minute extraction window, Commander. The Swiss asset is already compromised. If she doesn't want to walk out that door, I will drag her out." Chavez made the mistake of reaching out. He didn't aim his rifle, he was just going to grab her bicep, to physically enforce his authority over a woman wearing oversized, ridiculous scrubs. It happened in a fraction of a second. Nadia didn't strike him. Striking left bruises, and striking took energy. Instead, she pivoted on her cheap rubber sole, dropping her center of gravity. As Chavez's hand closed around empty air, Nadia's left hand shot up, her thumb driving with surgical precision into the brachial plexus beneath his armpit. Chavez gasped, his entire right side instantly going paralyzed. Before he could process the sudden, terrifying deadness in his limb, Nadia swept her right foot behind his heel. She grabbed the collar of his heavy plate carrier and pulled downward, using his own forward momentum and 80 pounds of tactical gear against him. Chavez crashed to the linoleum with a sickening, heavy thud that rattled the plastic drug cabinets. Nadia didn't stop. She knelt directly on his throat, her knee pressing just hard enough to restrict his airway but not crush the cartilage. Her right hand, devoid of a weapon, hovered inches from his eyes, 2 fingers curled tightly together. The third operative immediately raised his rifle, the red dot laser slicing through the fluorescent light to rest squarely on the center of Nadia's forehead. "Hold your fire," Brooks barked, his voice echoing off the cinder block walls. The ER was entirely frozen. Chloe was sobbing softly under the triage desk. Dr. Higgins looked like he was going to vomit. The metallic tang of adrenaline sweat cut through the ever-present hospital bleach. Nadia stared down at Chavez. The young operative's face was turning a blotchy purple. His eyes were wide, frantic, darting from the knee on his throat to the dull, emotionless face of the woman he had just tried to manhandle. She felt nothing. No triumph, no righteous anger, just a cold, mechanical necessity. She hated it. She hated how easily the violence slipped back on, like a perfectly tailored, blood-soaked coat. "Next time you reach for me," Nadia whispered, her voice barely carrying over the drone of the helicopter outside. "I won't aim for the nerve bundle. I'll take your eye." She stood up, stepping over Chavez's gasping form as he rolled onto his side, coughing violently. The red laser danced across her face, but she ignored it, turning back to Brooks. "You're sloppy, Dante," she said flatly. "Bringing rookies to pull a ghost." Brooks didn't flinch. He looked down at Chavez, then back up at Nadia. "I bring who they give me. The world got considerably uglier while you were emptying bedpans, Nadia. We lost 3 teams in Zurich last night." Nadia crossed her arms. "Not my problem. I died in Kandahar." "It is your problem," Brooks countered, his voice dropping to a low, lethal murmur. "Because the payload they moved out of Zurich? It's the Jericho file." Nadia's breathing stopped. The rhythmic hum of the hospital monitors faded into a distant, underwater ringing. A phantom smell invaded her nostrils. Burning server racks, copper blood, and the ozone scent of a breached, reinforced door. Jericho. It wasn't a file. It was a list, an unredacted, decrypted ledger of every deep cover asset embedded in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. People with families, people with children, people who had trusted Nadia to bury that ledger under 2 tons of sea 4 or 5 years ago. "That's impossible," she whispered. Her hands, steady during the violence, began to tremble slightly. "I watched it burn. You watched a decoy burn. Brooks said. The cruelty of the truth was laid bare in his tone. He played you, Nadia, and now he's selling the real one in 48 hours. She turned her head, looking out the large glass windows of the ER. The Black Hawk sat in the parking lot, a massive, waiting beast. Its exhaust distorted the gray morning air. Behind her, St. Jude's Memorial was waking up. Somewhere on the third floor, a patient was pressing a call button. A dietary aide would be wheeling up trays of rubbery eggs and watery oatmeal soon. It was a small, quiet, profoundly safe world, and it was gone. "Give me 5 minutes," Nadia said, her voice devoid of life. She didn't wait for Brooks to agree. She turned and walked down the south corridor, leaving the muddy footprints of the operatives behind. Higgins watched her go, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. "Jenkins?" Higgins managed to croak. Nadia paused at the swinging doors of the hallway. She looked over her shoulder at the doctor. For a brief second, the corner of her mouth twitched into a sad, microscopic smile. "The IV in bed 4 is secure, doctor," she said. "Make sure he doesn't bend his wrist." Fluorescent light flickered in the cramped employee locker room, casting a sickly, green pallor over the rows of dented gray metal. Nadia stood in front of locker number 42. The dial on the cheap combination lock felt foreign under her fingers. "Sansi Arling Joe." The locker popped open. Inside hung a beige cardigan, a spare pair of cheap blue light glasses, and a half-eaten box of dry granola bars, the artifacts of a fictional woman. Nadia reached up and pulled the plastic claw clip from her hair. The mousy brown strands fell around her shoulders, limp and heavy. She kicked off the rubber-soled nursing shoes. They hit the bottom of the locker with a dull thud. Next came the scrubs. She pulled the oversized seafoam top over her head, shivering slightly as the damp, chilled air of the hospital touched her bare skin. If anyone had been in the locker room, they would have seen the map of her history, a jagged, silver ridge across her left collarbone from a piece of shrapnel in Bogota, a smooth, round burn mark on her right rib cage from a close-quarters struggle in Chechnya, and a thick, angry keloid scar that wrapped entirely around her left bicep, the souvenir of the drone strike that was supposed to have ended her life. She didn't look in the small, cracked mirror taped to the locker door. She didn't want to see her own eyes. She reached to the very bottom of the locker, pushing aside the granola bars, and pulled out a heavy, dark canvas duffel bag. She had packed it 3 years ago, promising herself she would never open it. It was heavy, dense with compressed Kevlar, vacuum-sealed medical kits, and cold, blued steel. She dressed quickly, muscle memory replacing conscious thought. Black tactical trousers, reinforced at the knees. Heavy-duty boots that laced up tight, providing immediate, rigid support to her ankles. A dark, gray, long-sleeved thermal shirt. She strapped a specialized, low-profile holster to her right thigh, securing the Velcro with a harsh, tearing sound that echoed in the quiet room. She left the beige cardigan hanging in the locker. She left the door open. When Nadia walked back into the emergency department, she wasn't hunched. She didn't shuffle. She moved with a silent, predatory grace, her footsteps entirely absorbed by the thick rubber soles of her boots. The seafoam scrubs were gone, and with them, the tired, clumsy nurse. Dr. Higgins and Chloe were huddled behind the triage desk. They stared at her as if she were an alien species. Nadia didn't offer them a goodbye. They didn't know her. They never had. Brooks and his men were waiting by the automatic sliding doors. Chavez was leaning heavily against the glass, rubbing his neck, his eyes filled with a toxic mixture of embarrassment and hatred. Nadia ignored him entirely. "Ready?" Brooks asked. He tossed her a heavy, black communication headset. Nadia caught it effortlessly out of the air. "Don't ever talk to me about peace again, Dante." She walked past him, stepping through the sliding doors and into the biting Oregon morning. The sensory assault was immediate. The twin engines of the Black Hawk screamed, tearing the air apart. The downwash from the rotors whipped her brown hair wildly across her face, stinging her cheeks with microscopic pieces of pulverized gravel and debris. The smell of combusted jet fuel was thick, choking out the scent of the nearby ocean. She walked toward the dark, open side door of the helicopter. The heat, radiating from the exhaust ports, baked the right side of her face. She climbed aboard, grabbing the canvas webbing and swinging her weight into the dark, vibrating belly of the aircraft. Brooks and the operatives followed, the side doors sliding shut with a heavy, definitive slam. The noise inside was deafening, a bone-rattling vibration that traveled from the metal floorboards directly up her spine. Nadia strapped herself into the jump seat, pulling the heavy four-point harness tight across her chest. She put the headset on, the thick foam instantly muffling the roar of the engines into a dull electronic whine. Taking off, the pilot's voice crackled through the comms. The helicopter lurched, lifting off the asphalt. Nadia leaned her head back against the vibrating metal bulkhead and closed her eyes. She felt the heavy, sickening sensation of gravity dropping away as the aircraft pitched forward, gaining altitude rapidly. She opened her eyes and looked out the small, scratch-clouded window. Below them, St. Jude's Memorial Hospital looked like a child's discarded toy block in the gray dawn. She could see her beat-up 1998 Toyota Corolla in the parking lot, its roof slightly dented from where the helicopter's landing gear had nearly crushed it. She watched the hospital shrink as they banked aggressively to the east, heading toward the rising sun. The Oregon coastline disappeared, replaced by deep, endless forests. Nadia felt a profound, aching emptiness in her chest. She had spent over 3 years trying to cultivate a soul, trying to unlearn the precise geometry of breaking human bones. She had tried to be someone who cared about stale donuts and squeaking linoleum. But as the Black Hawk tore through the clouds, heading toward an inevitable bloodbath halfway across the world, she recognized a terrifying truth. The shaking in her hands had completely stopped. Her breathing was slow, even, and perfect. She wasn't a nurse. She was a weapon. And weapons don't get to rest until they are entirely broken. If Nadia's journey from the shadows of a quiet hospital to the relentless roar of a Black Hawk kept you on the edge of your seat, don't let the story end here. Hit that like button, share this video with your fellow thriller enthusiasts, and subscribe to our channel for more intense, deeply human stories. Drop a comment below telling us what you think Nadia's next move should be. Your support helps us bring more gripping narratives to life.
Hi, my name is Jeffrey Williams, the owner and manager of Second Ember Reborn. After watching the video, no one noticed the quiet nurse until a black helicopter landed looking for her. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the contrast between the quiet life Sarah tried to build and the past she could never fully leave behind. She spent years helping people, staying out of the spotlight and searching for something close to peace, only to be pulled back into a world she thought was over. One lesson I took from this story is that we never really know what experiences someone carries beneath the surface. The people we overlook may have faced challenges we can't imagine. Do you think Sarah made the right choice when she left with the team? And what moment in the story stood out to you the most? If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy these nurse-centered stories, feel free to like or subscribe for more.